Welcome, everybody. Hello, thanks for being here. This is your daily spiritual check-in with me, Doug Runger. Coming live at you from New Jersey. I'm in Jersey this morning, all the way over in New Jersey. Got my passport renewed, visa stamped, and made it all the way out to New Jersey, where I'm visiting my wife's family. It was Mother's Day weekend, over the weekend here. I think Mother's Day is a global thing, right? It's not just an American thing. And Mother's Day in other places. And I think it's all my mother-in-law. And I'm here today. I'm going back to New York later today. But stayed the night in New Jersey last night. And now I'm here with all of you guys. And I'm grateful to be with you. I hope your weekend is well. I hope you're doing well. And I'm glad that you're here. Last week we had a beautiful conversation, a week of conversations with Vasudev Prabhu. If you didn't catch those, please go back and listen. This week we were going to have Premanjali with us, but she canceled last minute. And I said, "No worry, I'll go solo." So she's going to probably join us next week. She's got a lot of things going on this week, and that's not going to be able to squeeze it into her schedule. So we got me, and we're going to be reading through the Gita to give ourselves a little bit of a spiritual check-in. And we've been reading the fourth chapter of the Gita. In and out, we bounce around here and there, but we've been in the fourth chapter titled Jnana Yoga, Transcendental Knowledge, and the idea of sacrifice is being described, which is an interesting one in spiritual life, because sometimes we think that, well, it's one thing that we discussed last week with Vasudev, which I appreciated very much, was the idea of having a clear goal in spiritual life. And that sometimes we perform our spiritual practices, or we're going about life in general without a clear reminder of why we're doing something. That was something Brajarani mentioned also the week before, whenever she was visiting with us and had beautiful conversations with Brajarani about being really clear about why we're doing something. And in our spiritual life, it's ultra important that we, not just once, but regularly, if not daily, take a step back and remind ourselves about our intentions, about what it is that we're trying to achieve. And very often we could get caught up in life without realizing that I'm working really, really hard, climbing a ladder that's leaned up against the wrong wall. I'm digging a ditch in the wrong area, and I'm searching for gold, I'm digging for oil, regardless of your opinion on fossil fuels. Just go with the analogy. I'm digging for water in a well in a place where it may not even be there. And we work really hard, and then we get resentful at circumstances. We get resentful at other people. Ever be in a relationship where you're resentful of somebody for not fulfilling your needs, and then realize that they never signed up for fulfilling those needs in the first place, or that you were never clear about your expectations? And we carry around a bunch of expectations, a bunch of unspoken needs that we're somehow just expecting life to fill for us. We expect religion to fill, we expect our work to fill, we expect our family to fill. And then when we end up empty, or we end up not getting what we want or need, or just feeling unfulfilled, we think it's somehow life's fault or other people's fault, or we look to blame, or look what went wrong, without recognizing that maybe we never took the time to recognize and get super, super clear what it is I'm trying to achieve, where I want to be, what I want to feel, what I want my life to feel like, which is often what we're looking for. We want to feel something. Very often we think, what I want my life to look like, but we don't recognize, we don't stop to ask what I want my life to feel like. Because it's actually a story that if I get my life to look a certain way, then I'll feel a certain way. That's the underlying belief. If I can get my life to look a certain way, if I can get my relationship status to look a certain way, if I can get my kids to behave a certain way, if I can get my bank balance to look a certain way, if I get my reputation to look a certain, my life looks a certain way, there's an assumption that I will feel a certain way. And that's marketing. Marketing sells you a story about getting your life to look a certain way. Social media sells you a story that if you get your life to look a certain way, the unspoken deal is that you will thus feel a certain way. You'll feel happy, you'll feel fulfilled, you'll feel purpose, you'll feel connected, you'll feel joyous. But those two things aren't always necessarily the case. And sometimes we end up our life looking a certain way, but we don't feel the way we want to feel, and we get confused. And so asking ourselves, what do I want my life to feel like, rather than just what I want my life to look like? What do I want my life to feel like? And then we can start to retrace our steps and things. What are the things I need to do? What are the people I need to surround myself with? What are the things I need to hear and input in my consciousness in order to get there? And that is this section of the Bhagavad Gita, which is uh, revolving around sacrifice. I was just reading, I was just speaking. There's a lot of parents that I know, a lot of new parents that I know. And when you speak to new parents, oftentimes there's this sense of they're constantly in a state like a bomb went off, you know, or that the state of like overwhelmedness, like, what did we just do? And then there's this sense of guilt, like, oh my God, I love my kids so much, but am I allowed to be tired and want to break from them? And I was talking with a parent, they're saying, like, we don't talk about, all we talk about is just how wonderful and beautiful and loved everything is, but we don't talk about the challenges of it sometimes. Like, I need a break, or I just want to break from my kids. Am I allowed to want to break from my kids? And we feel guilty, like I'm a bad parent. And it reminded me of this article that I read from Glennon Doyle once long ago, where she was in a Target shopping, and a woman came up to her and she was with her 3 kids, and her 3 kids were just a mess, and they were shoplifting stuff off the shelves and picking up lollipops off the ground and eating the pens that you used to sign your credit card with, and just like crying, and it was just like a chaos and a mess, and she wanted to get out of there. And some lady walked up and just said, oh, just treasure these moments so much, because it's just, I loved every moment of raising my kids. And Glennon just said, oh, great, thank you, I appreciate that, yes, it's so wonderful. But what I wanted to say was, I don't feel that way all the time. And she quoted this phrase from an author who was asked a question, do you love writing? And he said, no, but I loved having written, meaning I don't always love the writing process, but I love the feeling when I've written something and I can look back and I can see what I created, and I can go back and I appreciate the writing process in hindsight. And so she was saying that also sometimes in the process of raising kids, it's hard, but I love being able to have children in my life and look back, and I loved having raised children. And I love she said, there's this phrase carpe diem, which is seize the day. And she says carpe kairos, which is this Greek word for moments. That sometimes the day is hard, but there are moments in it which are really beautiful and lovely that you can capture. But it doesn't mean that every moment is this beautiful, magical mystery of joy. That sometimes some of the moments are really, really hard. But it's the overall arc, working through hard things, that gets us to a place of fulfillment where we look back and think, wow, that was overarchingly very satisfying. And so this idea of sacrifice doesn't mean that, it means that in order to sometimes get to the place we want to feel, in order yeah, I love having children, and I love having a loving relationship with my kids, or I love the process of creating something and having created something valuable in my life, or my career. I love having had a successful career, even though the career itself was very challenging, whatever it might be, in a marriage, with kids, in a career, with our health. Why is it that people love working out? I don't think people love the feeling of making their body exhausted. People love the feeling of knowing that they're getting healthy, of knowing that they're trying to get their health where they want it to be. That's the satisfying element of it. So again, it's the clear goal that we keep in mind. So Krishna talks about sacrifice in the Bhagavad Gita, and he talks about all these different types of people who perform different types of sacrifices based off of what they want. So in the beginning of the second chapter, or not in the beginning, but at a certain point later on in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks this verse, Vyavasyatmaka buddhir ekeha kuru nandana. This idea of Vyavasyatmaka buddhir ekeha kuru nandana. Eka means one. And so he's saying there's this one pointed focus of recognizing what I'm trying to achieve in spiritual life. But those who are irresolute are many branched. Those who get distracted very easily, those who just kind of jump from one thing to the next, end up in a place of feeling scattered and unfulfilled. And so Krishna, from the very, very beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, talks about learning to be focused, learning to reset my spiritual intentions regularly. And Krishna, the Bhagavad Gita is not a proselytizing literature. It's not a canvassing towards a particular camp. Krishna, somebody was asking me the other day after Thursday Night Kirtan in the Bhakti Center about free will and destiny. And that it seems that everything's predestined, and that even Krishna says that the outcome of the battle is already determined. You can be just an instrument, O Arjuna. But it's very interesting that the very, very last thing that Krishna says to Arjuna is, I've told you everything I need to tell you. Now you decide what you want to do. He gives Arjuna that choice that ultimately, at the end of the day, I've given you all the options. I've given you all the roads, and I've told you where those roads will lead you. And at the end of the day, you choose which path you start walking on based on where you want to end up. And so simply it's an invitation to leading a thoughtful life. Spirituality is simply a process of leading a thoughtful life. And the rituals and all of the rules and regulations and prohibitions and prescriptions, they become empty ritual when we're just doing them mindlessly. But when we recognize that we are doing them with the aim of going somewhere, and if we lose sight of that aim, we will lose inspiration in spiritual life. You will lose inspiration in spiritual life if you don't keep a strong focus on where you're going and why you're trying to get there, which is why it's so important to have association of inspired devotees in your life, because they remind us, oh my God, this is what it's like to make progress in spiritual life. This is the kind of person I aspire to be like. This is what it's like for somebody. And that's why Krishna, in that same second chapter of the Gita, after Krishna says, this idea of being one pointed in focus, Arjuna asked the question, well, what does that look like? What does that look like for somebody who is, Arjuna says, oh Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How do they speak? What are their language? How do they sit? How do they walk? Meaning, how do they move through the world? How do they find presence in the world? How do they engage with the world? How do they respond to the world? Because I want to see that, and I want to be reminded about where it is I'm trying to go and the type of person I aspire to be like. And it's so important for us to also keep in mind, who are my role models in life? You don't realize that every account you follow on social media is a mini role model. I mean, they're not role models. It's just entertainment, you know? I hate them, but I think they're interesting. So I just kind of, for shock value, it's just entertainment. Your brain is subtly molding towards receiving that person's personality into your life and thinking, this is how people should be. This is how I want to be. You mold yourself according to the association that you keep. And so a big spiritual practice is just simply keeping tabs on who we surround ourselves with. And so Krishna, in the fourth chapter of the Gita, starts talking about sacrifice. And the last verse that we read, verse 24 in the fourth chapter, a person who's fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, in God consciousness, in spiritual awareness. So how do you get fully absorbed? It's by remembering your spiritual intention and connecting everything in your life to that. They're sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of their full contribution to the spiritual activities. Everything becomes aligned to that spiritual focus. And they attain the spiritual kingdom. Why? Not because it's a geographical point on the earth, not because it's a place that I've built a staircase to heaven, but it's because spiritual consciousness is a state of living. It's a state of mind. It's a state of awareness that I can create by the way I approach my life. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of their full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. So everything in my life becomes spiritual when I connect it to my spiritual purpose. And so then he lists all of these different ways in which people create offerings, um, and ways in which people dedicate their lives for different purposes. In verse 25, we'll read. Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods, devas, by offering different sacrifices to them, and some offer sacrifice in the fire of the supreme Brahman. Srila Prabhupada's commentary. As described above, a person engaged in discharging duties in Krishna consciousness, in God consciousness, and spiritual awareness is also called a perfect yogi or first-class mystic. We were just reading those verses. But there are others also who perform similar sacrifices in the worship of demigods, and still others who sacrifice to the Supreme Brahman or the impersonal feature of the Supreme Lord. So there are different kinds of sacrifices in terms of different categories. Such different categories of sacrifice by different types of performers only superficially demark varieties of sacrifice. Factually, sacrifice means to satisfy the Supreme Vishnu, who is also known as Yajna. All the different varieties of sacrifice can be placed within two primary divisions, namely sacrifice of worldly possessions and sacrifice in pursuit of transcendental knowledge. Those who are in Krishna consciousness sacrifice all material possessions for the satisfaction of the Supreme, while others who want some temporary material happiness sacrifice their material possessions to satisfy demigods such as Indra, the sun god, etc. And others who are impersonalists sacrifice their identity by merging into the existence of impersonal Brahman. I'm going to pause here, the commentary goes on. But it's a very, very important point that's being made here, is that people, spiritualists and materialists, can both be working very, very, very hard, but for very, very different purposes. It's not that when I come to spiritual life, I work any less hard. And it's not that because somebody's a materialist, that they're working, that they're also not very skilled and sincere and hardworking and achieving amazing things through their efforts. It's just simply, where am I directing my efforts in order to achieve what type of goal? And so, again, it comes back to that point of being very, very, very clear about what am I trying to achieve? Am I trying to bring myself closer to spirit? Am I trying to bring myself closer to higher power? Am I trying to inflate my ego? Am I trying to build a kingdom here on earth? Am I trying to accumulate wealth? Am I trying to accumulate a reputation? Am I trying to prove something to my parents or to society or to my friends? The Prabhupada goes on, the demigods are powerful living entities appointed by the Supreme for the maintenance and supervision of all material functions like the heating, watering, and lighting of the universe. Those who are interested in material benefits worship the demigods by various sacrifices according to the Vedic rituals. They are called Bha Ishwara Vadi, or believers in many gods. But others who worship the impersonal feature of the absolute truth and regard the forms of the demigods as temporary sacrifice their individual selves in the supreme fire and thus end their individual existences by merging into the existence of the Supreme. Such impersonalists sacrifice their time in philosophical speculation to understand the transcendental nature of the Supreme. In other words, the fruit of workers sacrifice their material possessions for material enjoyment, whereas the impersonalists sacrifice their material designations with a view to merging into the existence of the Supreme. For the impersonalists, the fire altar of sacrifice is the Supreme Brahman, and the offering is the self being consumed by the fire of Brahman. The Krishna conscious person, like Arjuna, however, sacrifices everything for the satisfaction of Krishna. And all his material possessions, as well as his own self, everything is sacrificed for Krishna. Thus, he is the first-class yogi, but he does not lose is individual existence. So there's this concept of sacrificing my possessions in order to achieve greater material wealth because I'm trying to achieve a better situation in the material world. Sacrificing my identity, meaning that like I lose my identity, I don't exist and I just merge into the absolute Brahman spirit. Or I recognize that I'm an eternal individual living entity that has an eternal loving relationship with that supreme person. And I'm willing to sacrifice everything, not so that I can get something in return, but simply so that I can align with my eternal dharma of being a servant of that absolute truth. And happiness and satisfaction and contentment and fulfillment are simply byproducts of those things. And I align myself accordingly because I just want to be connected with that supreme absolute truth. So these are the different sacrifices that are being offered, are being described, and there's more that will come up. But the takeaway is that whenever I become frustrated in my spiritual life, if that occurs, it's helpful for me to take a moment and think, wow, maybe there was some motive that I was unaware of that was driving me, that's not being fulfilled, that I need to take a closer look at. And I either need to find a way of chiseling out that ulterior motive, which is like an anarta, which is like a weed in the heart, and overcome it. Or I need to be honest with myself and self-reflective that this is something that I can't deny. I need a level of material comfort. I need a level of social reputation in order for me to function sanely in the world. A place to stand where I know who I am in the world so that I can perform my service peacefully. And so, but all of it rests on the process of self-reflection and honesty with our motives, with our desires, and with what we're trying to achieve. Okay, that's all I got for today. Love you guys. Thank you. Appreciate you. We're going to turn it over to Kimberly, who's got some takeaways for us, whatever it is that we can walk away with. What you got for us, Kimberly?
Thanks, Daya. Today we're walking away with the question to ask, what do I want my life to feel like?
Uh,
And perform sacrifices based on the goal. Everything becomes spiritual when connected to a spiritual purpose. And that spirituality is an invitation to lead a thoughtful life.
Spirituality is an invitation to lead a thoughtful life. Thank you. For me, I think it's a beautiful just takeaway. Like, what is it that I'm aiming to achieve and get, and um, what is it that I really want my life to feel like, and based on that, how can I arrange my life to look a certain way? Always a good process. Thank you guys. Love you guys. Grateful for you guys. Please have a wonderful day. Please take care. Please tell somebody that you love them. And we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Be well. Bye bye.